On Christmas morning, my son told me, "Dad, don't bother coming inside. You're no longer welcome." His friends pointed and laughed while I walked away quietly. 2 days later, when the bank notices arrived, the whole family went silent. They never expected this. The cold hit first, the kind that stings the skin and makes the breath look like smoke. I was standing on the front steps with a tin of cinnamon rolls in my hands, warm through the towel I'd wrapped around them. Behind the door, I could hear music, clinking glasses, a burst of laughter. When the door opened, the music spilled out like it was happy to be free, and my son filled the frame in his new red sweater, eyes bright, mouth already forming a shape I recognized. He didn't hug me. He didn't even step aside. "Don't bother coming inside, Dad," he said, loud enough that the people in the foyer heard him. "You're no longer welcome." It was like someone snapped a small stick inside my chest. I stood there with the tin in my hands and nodded, because what else do you do when your own blood says it like a security guard? Behind him, his friends looked at each other, and then at me, and a few of them laughed, the careful kind of laugh people use when they want to be cruel without taking responsibility. If you're hearing this, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far a father's voice can travel. Tell me where the cold finds you when your family shuts the door. He didn't slam it in my face. That would have been merciful. He held the door open with one hand and watched me, waiting for a scene I wouldn't give him. The wreath above him was new, pine with small white berries, and a ribbon my late wife would have chosen if she were still here. Her good taste survived her, even if our gentleness didn't. A boy I didn't know leaned against the hallway table with a wine glass and smirked. A girl I'd seen on his social pages, the one with the sharp jaw and expensive coat, whispered something into my son's ear and ran her fingers down his sleeve. He smiled at her, not at me. My feet were on the same mat I'd bought years ago with the word "welcome" stitched in gold. I noticed a dark stain on the corner of it, shaped like a little country I couldn't name. I shifted the warm tin from one hand to the other and said, in a voice that felt borrowed from someone else, "Merry Christmas." My son blinked like I had committed a small offense by saying those words to him uninvited. "Just go, Dad," he said. His friends looked at me the way young people look at an old sign on a familiar road, as if it's always been there and never mattered. The wind pushed at the edge of the door, and a strand of ribbon tapped against the frame. I didn't ask why. I knew enough not to. People who mean to hurt you are thrilled when you give them a stage. They want the begging, the raised voice, the finger pointing, the apology that confesses to crimes you never committed. I have been many things in my life: husband, father, provider, man who learns how to fix a leaking pipe at midnight because a plumber can't come till morning. But I am not a performer for other people's pride. So I looked at my son. I took in the flush on his cheeks, the set of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared as if the doorway were a border, and he the keeper of a nation that didn't include me. I placed the tin on the step beside my left boot with care, because cinnamon rolls don't deserve a fall just because people forget their own softness. "Eat them or don't," I said. "Your mother's recipe." He flinched the way people do when a ghost brushes past. "We're busy," he said. The girl laughed then, a small ring of sound like glass tapping glass. I almost smiled, not from amusement, from something colder. "Of course," I said. "You always are." My voice was flat, and it made two of his friends look away. I turned, and step by step, I walked down those 3 stairs like a man carrying a weight on his back that no one could see. The air outside tasted of pine and snow. That taste used to mean something different. It used to mean my wife humming in the kitchen while the oven light glowed, our son running circles around a tree we dragged in together and set up in the corner by the piano. I can still feel the prick of the needles where I pushed them into the stand, my hands sticky with sap, my wife laughing and flicking a bit of tinsel at me when I pretended to curse under my breath. She had a way of making even the messy parts feel like a holiday. She would press a shawl over her shoulders and step back to judge the lights, head tilted, lips pursed like a conductor ready to begin. "Too much on the left," she'd say. "Balance the right." And I would move bulbs, and she would nod. And our boy, small then, all knees and questions, would hold a star as big as his head and beg to be the one to place it. We would lift him together, my hand under his foot, her hand under his other foot, his tiny palms braced on our shoulders as if, for that one moment, we were a ladder he could climb to touch something bright. He would shout, "I did it!" And we would tell him, "We did it." And I remember thinking there isn't a better sentence in the world than that one. We did it. We three. There was one Christmas when money was tight. I had been working double shifts and selling old tools I thought I'd keep for life. I told her, "This year we go small," and she kissed my cheek and said, "Small can still be warm." She found a way to make everything stretch: meals, smiles, hope. We wrapped second-hand books in brown paper we cut from grocery bags and drew little holly leaves in the corners. Our son opened a sweater I'd darned at the elbow and smiled like it was brand new. He didn't know what sacrifice smelled like yet. We didn't want him to. Later that night, after we'd tucked him in, she pressed a little envelope into my palm. "It's not much," she said. Inside was a note with the words, "Thank you for carrying us." I still have that note. The ink has ghosted and the paper has softened, but it rests where I keep important things. You learn, if you live long enough, that the softest paper can hold the heaviest promise. When she fell ill, winter had just started to show its teeth. The house felt too big for the three of us, and then too big for the two of us. The day we came back from the hospital without her, my son sat on the bottom stair and looked up at the ceiling as if someone might lower her back down. I sat next to him and kept one hand on the banister and the other on his shoulder. We stayed that way for a long time, staring at nothing together, which is what grief looks like when it's freshly poured. I told him I would keep the house warm. I told him I would keep the lights on, the door open, the life steady. "We carry her forward," I said. He nodded, but he was a teenager then, and teenagers think forward is a straight line. It isn't. It curves. It takes you back to the same door in different seasons. And sometimes you find yourself standing outside it with a warm tin in your hands and a sentence you didn't earn thrown at your face. People will ask, because they always do, when did it start to change? There isn't one date stamped on the day a child decides he is separate from you. It's slow, it's small. It's a look over your shoulder instead of into your eyes. It's a new phone that never sits face up. It's dinners moved from the table to a room with a door. It's jokes about old man taste, said with a grin that hopes for a laugh and delivers a nick. Then there are people who find your son's soft spots and teach him to love only the versions of himself that shine under club lights. He brought home friends with quick tongues and slow gratitude. A few were kind, many were not. He fell for a girl who could thread a compliment through a needle and pull cruelty after it like thread. She didn't see a home, she saw a stage. She didn't see a father, she saw an obstacle to move around. At first I said nothing, because my wife once told me, "Let love figure itself out." But silence can look like permission to those who want things they haven't earned. So the looks turned into words. The words turned into rules I had not agreed to. "You should stay at your place more," he said once, as if the home I built with his mother was a guest room I'd overstayed. I looked at him. I wanted to say, "My place is where your mother's laughter still lives." But I swallowed it. I learned to keep certain sentences for myself. Even then, there were good moments. He helped me paint the back fence in the fall and told me a joke that made me snort. He came by one night with takeout noodles and we ate them in the kitchen with the window open, listening to the leaves shiver. He showed me a picture of a watch he wanted, and I teased him for wanting something so shiny. He rolled his eyes and said, "It's not that shiny." We laughed. There was a birthday I recall, his, when I stood up to say a few words and he cut me off, a joke in his voice. "Short speech, old man." Everyone laughed. I smiled along. Later, he hugged me in the hallway and whispered, "You know I'm kidding, right?" I said I did. I told myself he was still the boy who needed two hands to lift a star. Maybe I said it because it was true. Maybe I said it because it was easier than admitting something else was happening, slow and sure as ice forming on a lake. I reached my car at the curb. Snow had gathered on the windshield, like someone had shaken a pillow over it. I stood with my hand on the handle and looked back at the house. Through the big front window, I could see them moving, blurs of red and white and gold. My son walked into view and took the tin from the step, peeking under the towel, and for a moment his face softened. He passed it to the girl, who peeled a roll apart like you would a flower, and I remembered his small hands doing the same thing once, sticky with sugar, his grin full of missing teeth. The memory hit so fast I had to steady myself against the car. That's the trick of memory. It doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, sets down its bags, and says, "I'm staying." I could have stood there and watched until the cold cut through my coat. Instead, I brushed the snow from the windshield with the side of my arm, started the engine, and let the heater hum its small tune. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a harmless, ordinary vibration. I didn't check it. Some messages you hold for later, some silences you keep now. The steering wheel warmed under my palms. I took a breath that fogged the inside glass and then cleared. There are men who would have marched back up those steps and demanded an audience. There are men who would have shouted, cursed, called the names they kept like coins in a jar for years. I respect anger. It announces itself. It can be honest. But I have learned that quiet is sharper. Quiet sinks in. Quiet lets other people hear the echo of their own words. I eased the car away from the curb and drove down the street lined with trees we planted the year after we moved in. They were thin then, held up by stakes and twine. They are thick now, strong enough to hold snow on their branches and not bend. I passed the park where my wife and I once sat on a bench and made a list of names we liked. I passed the corner store where the owner gives dog biscuits to children and children to dogs, depending on who's hungrier. The town looked exactly as it always does, on Christmas morning, quiet streets, smoke from chimneys, the faint sound of a radio somewhere. It is a strange thing to feel your life unchanged and undone at the same time. You might be waiting for the part where I say what I felt. I'll tell you. It wasn't fury, though. That would have been easier. It wasn't grief alone, though that stalked me like a thin dog. It was something colder, something that sits still and watches. A steadying, a settling, a voice in me that has always belonged to my wife, reminding me of what lasts and what doesn't. Be the roof, not the storm, she used to say, when our boy threw tantrums over small things. A roof takes the weather and holds. A storm passes through and wonders why nothing stands after. I drove and let the quiet do its work. I did not plan a speech. I did not rehearse a punishment. I let a truth I had kept safe in my pocket for years turn over in my mind like a warm stone. Not today, I thought. Not on a doorstep with strangers for a jury. Not with cinnamon on the air and my wife's ribbon bobbing on a wreath. There are better rooms for certain conversations. There are better tables for certain papers. I parked at my small place, the one bedroom I moved into, when the house got too full of noise that was not mine. I unlocked the door, hung my coat, and placed my keys in the ceramic dish my wife made in a pottery class when we were young and broke and delighted by anything we could make with our hands. The dish has a crack in it, a clean line from one edge to the other, like a quiet scar. It holds, though. I put a kettle on, not because I wanted tea, but because the sound of water building toward a boil is a promise that something warm is coming. I stood at the window and watched the light fade, a slow dimming, as if the town were turning its own dimmer switch. If you're still with me, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you have stood in a doorway you once called home and felt like a visitor in a museum of your own life. Tell me if you have learned how to hold your words in your fist until the time is right to open it. I sat finally at the small table by the window, with the steam from the mug curling up in front of me. I looked at my hands. They are not the hands I had when I first held my son. They have scars from building things, from fixing things, from carrying boxes upstairs when young backs were busy elsewhere. They are steady hands. It occurred to me that steadiness is its own kind of strength, the sort that doesn't announce itself, but shows up when called. I thought of my wife humming, of my boy with the star, of the scent of cinnamon that now lived in someone else's laughter. I closed my eyes and let the day sit next to me without trying to move it. There would be time to do what needed doing. There would be time to show, not tell, the difference between a door and a wall, between a home and a stage, between love and the performance of it. That was the first time I smiled that day. Not wide, just the kind of smile that has no heat in it. It came with a thought as simple as a key turning in a lock. Families are supposed to be the place you never audition for. They are supposed to be the place you do not earn by invitation, but enter by birthright and care. And when someone forgets that, you don't scream at the door. You remember what the house is made of. You remember who built it. You remember where the real light switch is. I finished my tea and washed the cup. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Outside, a car passed, its tires whispering on the snow. I stood in the quiet and let it hold me up. I woke up early the next morning, and the room felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that almost rings. I made coffee I didn't want, and stood by the window watching the street collect thin lines of tire marks. My phone lit up on the table. A message from an unknown number slid across the screen with a photo attached. There was my son in his red sweater, arm around the girl with the sharp jaw, a circle of faces behind them, my hallway in the background, my paintings on the wall. Someone had written a caption with a laughing emoji I won't repeat. I stared until the screen dimmed and my reflection came back, a tired man holding a cup. I set the phone face down and let the coffee go cold. Loneliness can be loud, but that morning it felt like a muffled room. Instead of answering, I washed the cup and listened to the sink swallow the water. I told myself, not today. If you were in my kitchen, you would have heard nothing but the slow breath of a man learning the shape of a new day. By noon, I had put on my coat and walked to the cemetery. Snow lay across the stones like folded quilts. Her name is cut clean into a gray slab with a small rose carved in the corner. Simple, the way she liked things. I brushed the snow from the top with my glove and stood there, hands in pockets. He turned me away, I said. It felt strange to say it out loud, even there. Said I wasn't welcome? The wind moved over the flat ground and pressed cold against my cheek. I told her about the tin of cinnamon rolls, about the wreath, about the laughter that wasn't for me. I told her about the smirk from a boy whose name I didn't know. I told her the part I didn't tell anyone else, that I kept waiting for one blink of the boy we raised together, the soft one who used to tilt his head against my shoulder when he was tired. He didn't show up, I said. But I did. I smiled a little at that, because it mattered. I stayed until my toes went numb, and then I promised her I'd keep the roof steady even if a storm decided to park over us for a while. When I got back to the street, the world had thawed just enough to make a thin skin of dirty water on the sidewalks. A package sat outside my door. No return address, just my name printed in a loud font. Inside, under tissue paper, was a sweater, the kind you buy when a store clerk says holiday. It wasn't my size. The card said, "So you look decent when you go out?" From E and Company. There was a smiley face drawn next to the letters like a nail in a heart. I had to laugh. It came out empty, but it counted. I folded the sweater and put it back in the box. On the kitchen counter, I set down a pen and wrote one sentence on the back of the card. Small can still be warm. Then I slid the card under the tissue and closed the lid. That was my answer. Not a speech, just a line. People imagine revenge as a shout. Sometimes it's a note you don't mail. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed again, this time with my son's name at the top like a flag. "Don't drop by today," he wrote. "We're having people over." A breath and then another text. "Also, I'm going to change a few things at the house. We need a fresh start." It was the we that did it, not him and me. Him and the audience he'd hired to clap. I wrote back just 3 words. Do what's right. It was not a challenge. It was a mirror. He typed for a long time, those 3 dots blinking like a small heartbeat, and then nothing came through. That told me enough. Silence carries meaning if you let it. I set the phone aside again and took out my old toolbox, the red one that smells like machine oil and wood dust, and tightened the small screws on a drawer that liked to complain. The sound of metal finding its place was, for a minute, better than music. That night, a neighbor sent me a message. He's the kind of man who knows every dog by name and every trash pickup schedule. "They put your chair on the curb," he wrote. "Didn't want you to be surprised." He sent a photo. My chair. The one with the nick on the arm from the afternoon our son toddled into it with a toy truck. And we laughed for 10 minutes because he didn't cry, just patted the wood and said, "Sorry, chair." It looked small out there by the gutter, fabric dark under the streetlight. I pulled on my boots and walked the few blocks back. I didn't rush. There were no sirens. When I got there, the chair had a blue sticker on it with the date of the next pickup. I leaned down, ran my hand over the worn arm, and felt the shape of that old nick. A young man came out of the house with 2 trash bags and paused when he saw me. "Hey," he said, like he'd found the owner of a stray. "You can't leave stuff near the driveway. She said it ruins the vibe." He tossed his chin toward the house. I looked at him and found nothing in my throat that would turn into a speech. "I'll take it," I said. He shrugged and went back inside, already somewhere else in his mind. I carried the chair down the street in slow lifts, resting every 30 steps when the fabric bit my forearms. No one offered to help. It wasn't a parade. It was just a man carrying a piece of his life through the cold. At my building, the downstairs neighbor, a quiet woman who waters plants on the stairs, held the door. "You want me to grab the other end?" she asked. "I've got it," I said. She nodded and did not ask questions. That's a kind of gift. In my living room, the chair looked too big at first. Then, it looked right. I sat in it and felt it remember me. The cushion sighed under my weight. A small thing, yes, but small can still be warm. I ran my hand along the nick again and told myself, this is not loss. This is inventory. It matters what you call things. The day after Christmas, the house called me like a tooth that you can't stop touching. I went in the afternoon when the light goes thin. The driveway was full of cars I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I saw the girls' parents at my dining table, the table I built with my own hands from boards I sanded in the garage, sawdust in my hair till midnight. Her father had his elbows on it. Her mother had her rings spread out like coins. I stood by the side gate and listened to the kitchen door hiss open and closed. "We should sell the piano," someone said. "It's old. My wife's piano, where she taught our son to find middle C with his eyes closed. We can use the room for the bar cart," another voice said. I could tell who by the way the vowels clipped. The girl. "It'll open the space." I pictured space opening like a mouth. I could have walked in then, key in the lock, name on the deed, my heartbeat drumming its way up into my ears. Instead, I stood still. The tree in the corner by the fence creaked once. Snow fell off a branch and hit the ground with a soft thud. I breathed slow. When I leave this world, I want someone to be able to say, I thought before I moved. A little later, the kitchen door opened again and my son stepped out alone, shoulders hunched against the cold. He lit a cigarette he doesn't admit he smokes and blew the cloud up into the gray air. He didn't see me by the gate. He took a drag, then another, and stared at the dark spot on the concrete where oil from an old car once lived. "You okay?" I said. My voice did not startle him. He turned his head just enough to see me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not angry, tired. I walked closer, the way you walk toward a dog you know won't bite. "I'm here now," I said. He shifted, a boy for a split second, then the man again. "We have plans," he said. "It's just better if you text before you come." I looked at the lit end of the cigarette, bright as a tiny coal. "This is my house," I said, a simple sentence spoken softly. He glanced toward the window, where the girl moved like a shadow. "It's ours," he said. "We're building something new." I let the words settle the way snow settles, quiet, covering things, but not changing their shape. Inside, someone laughed, and he put out the cigarette with a quick twist of his fingers. "Look," he said, "I don't want to fight." "Neither do I," I said. "Good," he said, and then the door opened and the girl leaned out. "Babe, they want to pick colors," she said. Then she looked at me and lifted her eyebrows the way people do when they see a stranger in a place they thought was private. "Hi," she added, a word with no friend in it. My son waited for me to speak. I gave him what I had. "Not today, Ethan," I said, flat, not mean. "You'd be in the way." His mouth opened, then closed. The girl blinked like a camera taking a picture in bad light. I stepped back through the gate and let it click shut. I did not rush. I didn't need the last word. I just needed the door to be between us. Some lines are drawn by wood and hinges, some by sentence and restraint. Walking home, I counted the lampposts. 5 to the corner, 3 to the bus stop, 2 more to the bakery with the window full of gingerbread houses. The counting was not about numbers. It was about rhythm, the music of putting one foot in front of the other when your brain wants to sprint into noise. In the bakery window, a woman adjusted a paper star. A child pressed her hands to the glass and watched her breath make small circles. I thought of the star we used to lift together. Things repeat. Not always the good things, not always the bad things. Just things. I kept walking until the cold found my wrists where my gloves didn't reach. Back at my table, I spread out a few papers. Ordinary papers, the kind that smell like ink and glue. I didn't need to read them. I know what they say. It's my job to know. You wouldn't have known, watching me, whether I was making a list for the grocery or a blueprint for something bigger. That's the point. Real power doesn't wave its arms. That evening, he called. I let it ring once, twice, and then I answered. His voice carried that strain people get when they're balancing 2 rooms. One where they are a child, one where they are a host. "I got your text," he said. "Do what's right," he repeated, as if trying the words on his tongue. "I will." "Good," I said. He waited. I'm changing the locks, he added, fast, like a bandage rip. Just for now. We need keys for the new setup. New setup, I said. He coughed. It's safer. For whom? I asked. He didn't answer that. I'll give you a new key, he said, and the way he said give told me a whole story. I could have told him about deeds, about signatures, about whose name sits where banks care about names. I didn't. Some classes should not be taught on speakerphone. We'll talk, I said, after the holidays. He exhaled. Fine. Merry Christmas, I added. The silence on his end was not cruel this time, just heavy. Merry Christmas, he said, and we hung up. Sleep doesn't always arrive when called. I sat in the chair they almost sent to the dump and watched the ceiling as if it might write words for me to read. The building made its little noises, pipes settling, a door down the hall closing softly, the elevator sighing somewhere. I let my thoughts walk through the rooms of the house we built, touching the backs of chairs, straightening a picture frame, pausing at the piano. I could hear her voice, the way she'd call down the hallway when dinner was ready, the way she'd tell me to stop worrying the numbers with my thumb. They won't change if you rub them, love, she'd say. I thought about numbers anyway, about the ones that hold up houses as surely as beams do, about the kind printed on paper, and the kind embedded in steel boxes with little doors. I didn't count them. I counted the breaths in and out until they leveled, a small boat finding calm water. Not anger, something colder. Cold doesn't burn, it preserves. The next morning, I woke to bright light and the sound of a plow dragging snow into a low wall along the curb. I made toast and ate it standing up, the way I did when our boy was small and mornings ran on fast forward. I wiped crumbs off the counter with my palm and thought about work. The quiet work of a man who knows that timing is not just a clock, it's a tool. I don't like the idea that life is a game, but if it is, then patience wins more rounds than people think. The phone on the table sat quiet, a black stone. I didn't touch it. I put on my coat, checked the pockets for keys I could find in the dark, and walked to the bank. Not because I needed to, but because habit is a rope that keeps you from slipping. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and warm air. A tree in the corner wore too many silver ribbons. Morning, the guard said. He has called me by my first name for 10 years. We talked about the weather, about the game I don't watch. The manager waved from his office and tilted his head in a way that asks, "Everything good?" I nodded. "Everything steady," I said. That was true. On the way back, I stopped by the hardware store and bought nothing. I just walked the aisles, breathing in the scent of wood and rubber and something else I can never name. I looked at boxes of screws and thought how honest they are. You don't have to guess their use. They do one job. They hold. Outside, a boy skidded on a patch of ice, arms pinwheeling, and his father grabbed his coat and steadied him before he fell. The boy laughed, embarrassed even though he'd been saved. The father smiled and said something I didn't hear. I watched them until they turned the corner. Some things still work the way they should. It's enough to keep a man moving. That evening, I walked past the house. The front light was on, and the windows glowed, but the curtains were drawn, so the house looked like a lantern with paper sides. I stood across the street long enough to feel the cold push its way through my boots. I was not spying. I was remembering angles, how light falls in that living room, where sound travels fast, which floorboards speak if you step on them. A car pulled up, and the girl's father got out, laughing loud, keys jangling. He used my name in his story and made it a punchline. People who laugh at the sound of your name forget you had it long before they learned it. He went in. And his voice. Joined the rest. I turned away and headed home, the street lamps throwing long, thin shadows that looked like lines on a map. I wasn't lost. I knew exactly where I was. Back in my chair, I wrote a list, not of what they took, of what remains. I wrote steadiness, roof, keys, papers, promise. I wrote her note. I wrote the boy we raised, not the man with a borrowed laugh. Then I folded the paper and put it in the dish with the crack. The dish held, as it always does. I slept early and woke in the middle of the night, with the clear thought that sometimes a door has to close for a window of understanding to open. It's a tired phrase, but it felt fresh in the dark. I let it stand. The room hummed with its own small machines, the heater clicking, the fridge sighing. I lay there and listened to the quiet. It did not accuse, it did not suggest. It just was. And inside that quiet, something steady moved into place, the way a key slides into a lock you've used for years and still find satisfying. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brings. I would be ready, not with noise, but with proof. Quiet is sharp. Quiet holds. Quiet waits. And when the time comes, it speaks in a voice no one forgets. 2 days later, the town woke under a sky the color of old tin, and the plow left a low ridge at the curb like a white sigh. I made coffee out of habit and stood with both palms around the mug, soaking the heat into my fingers the way you do at the start of a job you've done 100 times. There is a rhythm to certain mornings if you've lived long enough. Unlock, switch on, check the gauges, listen for anything that sounds wrong. I wasn't thinking about speeches or scenes. I was thinking about keys, about the exact weight of a brass one on a ring, and about a little box in a quiet room where light always looks like afternoon, no matter what the clock says. I rinsed the cup, wiped the sink with the back of my wrist, and took the dish with the crack from the counter. Under it lay a small envelope I'd labeled years ago in my wife's careful script, because she said my block letters looked like instructions, not names. The envelope held 2 flat keys wrapped in wax paper, and a folded note she'd written the spring before she got sick. I read that note only once. I didn't need to read it again to know what it said. I slipped the keys into my pocket and felt the old steadiness rise like a tide under my ribs. The bank lobby always smells like lemon polish and carpet warm from people's feet. The guard nodded like he always does. The manager came out of his glass-walled office and shook my hand with both of his smile small but honest. The way people smile at a man who has never yelled at a teller for doing her job. "Good morning," he said, and he meant it. We went into the small room where the safe deposit boxes live, that room where even whispers sound like they're already written down. He waited while I signed, then slid the long metal drawer out of the wall and set it on the table with the little green pad. The key turned smooth. When I opened the lid, the papers did what papers do. They lay there and kept their secrets until someone asked the right question. On top was the deed with the name that matters, not mine and not his, but the trust my wife and I built out of her caution and my agreement the day we realized love needed structure as much as light. Below that, the document that changes everything when necessary, the amendment naming me sole acting trustee in the event of undue influence, incapacity, or circumstances in which the trust property is at risk of misuse. Lawyers like to string words together until they sound like a fence. You learn to read fences. I don't say these words out loud often because they're not dinner talk, but I knew them by heart. The house and the land sit in the name of the Maple Street Trust, and the trust sits in my hands until the terms we wrote together are met. Those terms include respect. Yes, we put that word in writing. Of occupancy, of maintenance, of access. They include a list of authorized users of the trust's accounts and lines, and a sentence that has saved more families than it has harmed. All changes to access must be approved by the acting trustee. We put that there not because we didn't trust our boy. We put it there because we understood time. Time changes people's circles. Time puts other hands on your door. My wife insisted. The same way she insisted we label the winter boxes so next year wouldn't feel like a hunt. "We're not rich," she had said, touching the deed with the flat of her palm, "but we are responsible." She wasn't wrong. Under the documents lay her letter. There are 2 kinds of letters that matter after a person leaves this world. The one to be opened when you're lonely, and the one to be opened when you're tempted to forget who you are. This was the second kind. She had written in blue ink and signed with the loop she always made on the last letter of her name, a tiny flourish only I noticed. "Open if the house forgets its rules," she'd written on the outside. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The rules weren't mine alone. They were ours. I put the papers back carefully, the way you put a child to bed, closed the lid, and slid the drawer into the wall with a click that felt like a sentence ending in a period instead of a question mark. We sat in his office then, the manager and I, with the blinds half tilted so, light made thin bars on the desk. I slid across the instructions I'd drafted years ago, simple, clear, signed and dated, updated every winter like the smoke alarm batteries. He read them and nodded the way men nod when a plan is both kind and firm. "We can execute these changes today," he said. "As you know, any authorized users will receive notices. As I know, the bank lives on notices. It's language. is cold on purpose. I asked him to make 3 adjustments. First, remove all supplementary cards attached to the trust's line of credit. Second, require dual confirmation for any large expenditures tied to the property. Third, send a routine occupancy verification letter to the registered address, the house, because sometimes a letter is a mirror and people need to see themselves in its glass. None of this was a trap. It was a reminder. We had agreed long ago that reminders are better than punishments. He keyed in the changes. The computer made small mechanical sounds, as if it too were setting its jaw. "There will be notices," he said again, because that's the part people remember. I signed one more page and stood. "Thank you," I said. He looked up at me like men look at weathered beams. "You've always been prudent," he said. "A word like that doesn't go on a cake, but it will hold up a roof." On the way out, I stopped by the tellers and asked after Carol, who arranges flowers on her days off and keeps a candy in her drawer for children who stare at the pens on chains. She laughed at something I said and pushed a peppermint toward me across the counter. I put it in my pocket, thinking of small red stripes on white, thinking of the way small things steady a hand. Outside, the sky had turned brighter, not blue, just a lighter shade of gray, the color of a thought clearing. I walked past the bakery and the hardware store and a boy sliding on one foot, and I let my mind step through the numbers again. The trust holds the house. I hold the trust. The lines of credit run through my voice. Utilities are in the trust name, not in the name of any person whose laughter depends on other people watching. It wasn't about choking anything off. It was about reminding the house of its bones. By noon, the first notice would have landed. An automatic email to the address my son prefers when he wants discounts and confirmations. A neat little thing with the subject line, "Important changes to your access." The language would be exact and impersonal. Your supplementary card ending in $3,400 has been suspended at the request of the primary account holder. Later, the Postal Service would handle the rest. White envelopes with clear windows, time sensitive, stamped in red like a red light at an empty intersection. I did not need to see them open those envelopes to know what happened next. You can hear the sound a room makes when money realizes it isn't in charge anymore. It's not panic at first. It's a click, a little hitch, a pause between sentences. Someone makes a joke. Someone else doesn't laugh. Then the phone calls start. He called it too, not to yell, not yet. "Dad," he said, and the word had more air in it than usual, as if it needed help standing. "I just got something from the bank." I listened. He let the silence fill in empty twice before he added, They say the card is suspended." "That's right," I said. "For now." "For now?" he echoed, the way people echo a word they hope will change if they say it again. "It's temporary," I said. "When we've clarified a few things, we'll turn it back on." "We?" His voice tilted on that one. "The trust," I said. "You know this." He knew this the way people know the alphabet, but forget the order sometimes. He was quiet long enough that I could hear dishes clinking in the background and someone whispering close to the mouthpiece. "They're also asking for an occupancy verification," he said finally. "A letter." "Yes," I said. "Routine." I didn't tell him the bank sends those letters when a property's utility patterns change, or when locks change, or when someone uses the word setup about a home as if it were a stage. He doesn't need that class. He needs a chair and a quiet room. Around 3, another call. Not my son this time. The girl's father, the man with the loud keys. "I'm calling about these notices," he said without naming himself, as if the seriousness of his voice could serve as a signature. "You can't just cut people off in the middle of the holidays." "I can ensure the trust property is used according to its terms," I said. "And I am." He tried the laugh he uses in rooms where he wants to sell something. "Let's be reasonable," he said. "We're making improvements. We're adding value." "To what you don't own," I said, calm. "Paper doesn't care about volume. It cares about ink." He began a sentence with "listen," and I let him finish it, and the two after it. When he wound down, I gave him my sentence, flat and short. "If you want to discuss improvements, bring your ideas and your costs to a meeting with me and with my son at the bank where pens are on chains." He didn't like that image. People who stand on rugs don't like being asked to stand on concrete. "We'll see about that," he said. And for a moment I heard in his voice the boy he used to be, pushing against a door that wasn't locked but was heavy. "We will," I said, and hung up. There are moments when you are tempted to be satisfied with small noises, the way a man goes quiet on the other end of a call, the way a house lowers its volume when it realizes someone is listening. But I have learned to wait for the deeper sound. At 4, the deeper sound arrived. A text from my son came in 3 parts, each one shorter than the last. First, "We need to talk." Then, "Can you come by?" Then, after a long stretch of dots, "Please." I put on my coat and walked through the cold that had sharpened into something that tasted like metal on the tongue. At the house, I didn't use my key. I knocked. Knocking is a kind of respect you can teach without a speech. He opened the door and didn't step aside immediately. The room behind him had the tight look rooms get when people have been arguing, and straightening cushions to make it look like they haven't. The girl's parents were not at the table. The girl stood by the tree with her arms crossed tight, like she was cold in a room that wasn't cold. My son looked older than he had on Christmas, not by years, by inches, as if the distance between his eyes and the door had lengthened. "We got the letters," he said. "I know," I said. He gestured toward the table where the envelopes lay opened, their edges torn in the way of people who think speed will change content. It says the trust." He stopped and tried again. "Why didn't you tell me you were going to do this?" "I told you years ago what the trust is for," I said. "Your mother and I told you together at that table." He looked at the table like it might speak. The girl lifted her chin and found a sharper tone. "This is punitive," she said. The word landed like a fork on a plate. "This is protective," I said. "Of the house, of him, of what we built. The terms are clear." She opened her mouth, then closed it, then tried another angle. "We've already made plans," she said. "We hired contractors. We picked paint." She glanced toward the piano and then away, as if the piano had looked back. "Plans change," I said. "Contracts wait until the person who can sign them is in the room." I kept my voice level and even, a plank laid flat across a gap. My son pulled out a chair and sat, the way you sit when your knees feel like they've been standing too long. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he did when he was 12 and knew he had to tell me about a dent in the car door. "I didn't realize, I thought..." He stopped and blew out a breath. "Dad, it's complicated with them," he said, nodding toward where the girl stood, making her face still. I glanced at the wreath, at the ribbon that now hung a little crooked, and I thought of the word we put into the trust on purpose: respect. "It doesn't have to be complicated," I said, "but it does have to be respectful. Of this house, of your mother's piano, of the man who can't be told he isn't welcome on his own front steps." He winced and looked down. The girl uncrossed her arms, crossed them again, then said, "We said some things." "You did," I said. "Not all of them at me. Some of them at who you think I am." She didn't like the feel of that sentence. People prefer to move walls they can see. She glanced at my son as if he might find a better script. He lifted his eyes and met mine. "What happens now?" he asked, simple, small. This is where a different father might have raised his voice, listed names and dates, flung back each slight like a knife. I thought of doing it and then let the thought pass. Knives dull when you fling them. Papers keep their edge. "Now we follow the terms," I said. "There will be a meeting at the bank with the manager. You will be there. I will be there. We will decide on a budget for anything you want to change. We will set a calendar. We will decide who has keys and why. Until then, no locks are changed, no pianos are sold, no bars roll into living rooms. You are not auditioning for this house. You are keeping it." He nodded, slow, like a man trying on a shirt he had thought was too tight and finding it fits. The girl said nothing. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nothing to say. Silence can be a teacher if you let it. He walked me to the door without prompting. On the mat, the same mat, it still said, "Welcome." And for a heartbeat, I remembered the stain shaped like a country I couldn't name. He cleared his throat. "I shouldn't have said what I said," he murmured, not loud, not composed. "On Christmas." I looked at his face. I saw the boy with the star and the man who wanted to be someone else at the same time. "Words have weight," I said. "So do letters." I nodded toward the table where the envelopes lay, white and still. "We'll pick them up together." He nodded. Behind him, the girl rustled like paper. I stepped out without looking back, because sometimes dignity is walking forward when you want to test the room to see if it follows you. On the street, the cold felt cleaner. My breath went out and didn't sting. I walked to the corner and paused at the lamppost that hums in winter. There are stories about fathers who plant a wire and listen to the house after they leave. That's not my way. I stood there and listened to the town instead. The tire hiss, the dog bark, the caw of a crow that sounds like a door hinge. I thought about the letter I hadn't opened and about the sentence on the envelope. Open if the house forgets its rules. The house had remembered in its way because a house remembers through the people who live in it and the papers that hold it upright. I put my hands in my pockets and felt the peppermint and the wax paper and the keys. The peppermint clicked against one key. The sound was nothing, but it pleased me. Small can still be warm. Back at my place, I took off my coat and set the keys in the crackled dish. I sat in the chair with a nick on the arm and let my body fall into the shape it's made into the cushion over years of sitting and thinking after work. There was no triumph in me, no glee, just the relief of a bolt sliding through a latch. I looked out at the evening settling in sheets and thought about how my wife and I had written those terms. We'd argued over words like reasonable and customary. She'd asked to include kindness, and I had laughed and said banks don't enforce kindness, and she'd said, no, but we can. So we did. We included a clause that says, decisions must favor the long-term care of the house and the dignity of the people who live inside it. Dignity is not a legal term, but we wrote it down anyway, and now, years later, that little word sat on the table of my old house in the form of white envelopes and quiet mouths. As night pulled its blanket up to the windows, my phone buzzed once more. A message from my son. Meeting tomorrow at 10. I'll call the bank. I typed back, I'll be there. He wrote, thank you. I stared at those two words for a long time. Gratitude is not a switch you flip. It's a light you learn to turn on when the room is dark. I put the phone face down and laughed once. Not empty this time, just a single sound like air being let out of a tight space. Then I reached for the folded list I'd made the night before, steadiness, roof, keys, papers, promise, and added another word under them, the one my wife would have written if she were here. I wrote, together. Then I set the paper back in the cracked dish where it settled like a small bird deciding the branch will hold. Morning came clean and cold, the kind that makes the bank's brass handles feel like ice, even after the door swings. I got there early, that's my way. The lobby hummed with quiet work. Copier size, low voices, shoes on carpet. The guard nodded and said my name, the way you say a word you've said every week for a decade. The manager stepped out of his glass office, tie a little crooked, smile the size of a man who likes problems that come with paper. Conference room's ready, he said. Pens on chains, a pitcher of water sweating into a circle on a paper doily. I took the chair with my back to the wall. Old habit. The clock on the far side clicked in small sounds, as if it were clearing its throat. My son arrived 5 minutes late, hair damp from a quick rinse, the red sweater traded for a gray one that didn't try so hard. He looked at the pens, at the blinds, at me, not at the manager yet. Dad, he said, like a question. I nodded. He sat. The chair made a small noise that felt louder than it was. Thank you for coming, the manager said, calm and orderly. We'll just review the trust terms and discuss next steps. He slid a thin folder toward us. The front said Maple Street Trust in a font my wife picked because it looked neighborly. My son's hand hovered over it, then dropped to his lap. Before we began, the door opened and the girl slipped in, her parents behind her like a breeze with opinions. The manager looked up. I'm afraid only trustees and beneficiaries can attend, he said, polite but firm. Privacy. The girl lifted her chin. We're family, she said. The manager folded his hands. Not for our purposes, he answered and gestured to the waiting area. It wasn't cruel. It was clean. They hesitated, then stepped back, the door closing with a click that felt like a sentence ending. Through the glass, I saw the girl's father take out his phone and start typing with his whole arm. The manager began. Per the trust, the property and related lines are controlled by the acting trustee. He looked at me. I nodded once. Expenditures for improvements, changes to access, and any structural modifications require written approval. He let the words sit. They didn't thud. They landed and held, the way a ladder does when you lean it against a good wall. My son's shoulders dropped a half inch. He didn't argue. He didn't pretend he hadn't heard this before. He traced a line in the wood grain of the table with his finger, like a boy following a river on a map. "I thought I had more room," he said. He wasn't defensive, just honest. "You have room," I said. "You don't have permission to turn a home into a stage." The manager slid another paper forward. "We'd recommend an interim plan," he said. "A budget for any updates, a calendar for guests, clarity on keys." He glanced at me. I kept my voice level. "No lock changes without approval," I said. "No major purchases without a signed plan. The piano stays. Your mother's room stays as it is until you can walk into it, without thinking of selling something to make space for noise." My son nodded, slow. "I wasn't going to sell the piano," he murmured. I looked at him. "Someone was," I said. The thought washed over his face like a gray cloud moving across a field. He looked toward the glass where shadows moved. Then he looked back at me. The manager turned a page. "There is also the matter of supplementary cards," he said. "They're suspended for now." My son swallowed. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked relieved to have a word that matched the feeling that had been kicking around under his ribs since the envelopes arrived. "For now," he echoed. "For now," I said. I slid a thinner envelope across the table. He didn't open it. "What's this?" "A simple budget," I said. "Groceries, utilities, repairs. The house eats like a living thing. Keep it fed." His mouth tilted. "And parties?" "Food for people who help carry the ladder," I said. It made him laugh once, short and real. He nodded. "Got it." The manager cleared his throat. "We also need an occupancy acknowledgement," he said. "A signature that you understand the terms of staying in the property as beneficiary." He placed the form in front of my son. It was plain, no tricks, a statement that the house is not a prize, not a stage, not a bargaining chip. It is a home held in trust. He read it all the way down, lips moving a little on the long words. He looked up. "I'll sign." He picked up the pen on its chain and signed the way he did when he was 18 at the DMV, careful, like the paper might change if he pressed too hard. Then he slid it back and exhaled. That's when the door opened again. The girl leaned in, eyes sharp. "Can I say one thing?" she asked the room. The manager glanced at me. I shrugged. "One thing," I said. She stepped in. "We just want to make it ours," she said. "It feels like a museum." I let the sentence stand. Museums are where we keep the things that teach us who we were, so we don't forget who we are. "You can make a museum warm," I said. "You don't sell the paintings to fit a bar cart." She blinked. The manager coughed softly into a fist that didn't need it. My son said, "We'll work with the plan," to her, not to me. That mattered. She stayed very still, then nodded like a dancer accepting a slower song. When they left us again, I opened my palm under the table and let the small stone of anger sit there a moment. It wasn't hot, it wasn't sharp, it was just weight. I set it down and reached inside my coat for a second envelope. This one older, the paper softer, the blue ink on the front fading at the edges. "For you," I said, and slid it to my son. He frowned. "What is it?" "A letter your mother wrote," I said. "Open it when you aren't in a hurry." He placed a hand on it and didn't flip it over. He didn't need to. He knew the loop of her last letter by the way the ink curled. His throat moved. He nodded once, a movement small enough that you might miss it if you weren't watching his eyes. We set the meeting's bones in place then. The manager drew boxes on a sheet of paper and wrote neat labels: keys, budget, guests, work orders. We agreed, 2 keys for now, his and mine, and a third kept in the bank's envelope for emergencies. A guest calendar that lives on the kitchen corkboard, like the one my wife used to pin recipes to. Any contractor proposal sent to both of us, with decisions made at tables like this, not over music and drinks. Nothing dramatic, just structure. The kind that holds when the wind shows up without calling ahead. When we stood, my son looked lighter, the way people look after they put a heavy thing in the right place. In the lobby, the girl and her parents were waiting with crossed arms and loud silence. The father started a speech about investments. The manager, to his credit, went professional in a way that put polite walls around us all. "You're welcome to open an account to talk about investments," he said. "Today we're talking about a trust." It landed. The father stopped. The mother, rings shining, said the word unfair, as if fairness lived in her palm. I didn't answer her. I looked at my son. "We'll go by the house," I said. "We'll make a list." He nodded. The girl's face returned to neutral. "There's a talent to that. It's useful in rooms where cameras live. It isn't much use at a kitchen table. Outside, the cold bit at the edges of our ears. We walk side by side without talking, the way you do after a doctor says the thing you feared and also says, "Here's what we'll do next." The house waited at the end of the street, windows bright, the wreath a little tired now, ribbon a touch frayed. He unlocked the door. He didn't step aside to let me in like a guest. He went through and held the door from the inside, the way a son holds a door for his father when he remembers who taught him to turn a knob. I stepped over the threshold and felt something in my chest shift. Just a notch, just a quiet click, like a level finding true. The living room had the look of a room that has been busy pretending to be a photograph. Cushions puffed, blankets folded, nothing out of place except the air. On the table, the bank envelopes sat where we left them this morning, as if they had followed us home. I picked one up and set it on the piano instead. "We'll open those later," I said. He nodded. He put the letter from his mother in the pocket of his sweater like a small, warm stone. We started our list with a pencil and the back of an old calendar. I like pencils. They admit mistakes. "Keys," I wrote. "Guest calendar," he added. "Repairs," I said. And we walked room to room, not as inspectors, not as judges, just as people who live in a place that breathes. In the kitchen, the hinge on the cabinet by the sink squealed. He looked at me. "I'll oil it," he said. In the hallway, a nail had pushed a tiny shadow through a frame. He pressed it back with his thumb. In the dining room, the table I built wore a new scratch near the edge. He saw me see it. "We had people over," he said, soft. "Someone dragged a bag across it." I touched the scratch. "Wood remembers," I said. "So does a man." He nodded and took a breath. At the piano, he stopped. He touched the lid, fingers gentle. "I didn't want to sell it," he said again, more to himself than to me. I lifted the lid. The keys reflected his face in tiny, broken whites. He pressed middle C the way he did when he was 6, tentative, as if a monster might wake inside. The note hung in the air and then faded, leaving us in a quiet that felt like respect. "She used to play that before dinner," he said, "to make us come to the table." "You came because you wanted to beat me to the first rolls," I said. He smiled. "Yeah." We let the smile sit between us until it made the room warmer by a degree. In the doorway, the girl watched. She had taken off her coat. Without the coat, she looked younger. She came in slow, like a person stepping into a church by accident. "Does the calendar really have to go on the corkboard?" she asked, not challenging, just checking. "Yes," I said. "1 month at a time. Last week of each month, you and he fill the next." "Pencil," she nodded. "What about New Year's?" "Family," I said. "Quiet, lights off at midnight." She bit her lip. Even if, I said. She didn't push. Not then. She looked at the piano and reached out one finger toward the keys, then pulled it back, as if the piano was an animal she didn't know yet. "She played?" she asked. "Better than she let on," I said. "She never liked to show off." The girl looked at her shoes. That landed somewhere. "I don't play," she said. "You can learn," I said. "People learn when the room expects them to be better." She looked up, surprised that the sentence had space for her in it. We went to the front door together and replaced the crooked wreath ribbon. He untied the knot, I retied it. Our fingers bumped once, and he didn't pull away. "We'll fix the hallway paint," he said. "It's scuffed." "We will," I said. "And the fence in the spring." He nodded. He wrote "Fence Spring" on the corner of the calendar, small. Not a promise to me, a promise to the house. The girl's parents came by around dusk with faces like questions. They didn't come inside, they stayed on the stoop. "We just wanted to check in," the father said too loud. "There's a New Year's party we've been planning." He looked over my son's shoulder, past me, into the room where the piano waited. My son didn't look back for help. He stood straighter and used his own voice. "It's family this year," he said. "Quiet. We've got a budget and a calendar now." The father's mouth tightened like a belt. The mother made the smallest scoff, the kind people make when they want to look like they didn't. I stood behind my son, but not in his shadow. He didn't turn. "We'll see you next week," he said, and closed the door gently, not in a face, just on a conversation that had no more work to do. The latch clicked. He turned to me. "That felt right," he said. "It did," I said. "Doors are for finishing sentences." We cooked. not a feast. Eggs in a pan, toast, a pot of tea. He reached for the pan handle and remembered it runs hot, grabbed a towel without being told. Little things you teach with years, not words. We ate at the table with the scratch and didn't avoid looking at it. I used to hide peas under my fork, he said. I used to pretend not to notice, I said. He laughed, the sound of a man starting to like his own notes again. After, he washed dishes and I dried, and the rhythm made something easy between us without us asking for it. In the steam of the sink, I watched his face relax. He glanced at the envelope in his pocket twice and didn't mention it. I didn't ask. Some letters open a person as much as they open themselves. When the kitchen was back in order, he stood in the doorway to the hall and hesitated. "I'll bring your chair back," he said. "From your place." I shook my head. "It's where it should be," I said. "I'm where I should be." He looked around the room as if measuring it for that sentence. "Then tomorrow, when I wake up, I'll oil the hinge," he said, "and take down the party lights in the backyard. And call the piano tuner," I added. "And call the piano tuner," he repeated, as if practicing a line he liked the sound of. He reached for his phone, then stopped and smiled. "I'll put it on the corkboard instead." He took the pencil and wrote, "Tune piano, Thursday." Before I left, he handed me the extra key. It was warm from his palm. "For emergencies?" he said. "And dinner," I said. He laughed again, quiet. At the door, he hesitated. He was a man and a boy and a son all at once. "Dad," he said. "I'm sorry." He said it like a man paying a bill he owes and wants to pay. I put my hand on the doorframe that holds up more weight than it looks like it can. "Words have weight," I said again. "So do repairs." He nodded. "I'll do the repairs." I put my hand on his shoulder. "We'll do them," I said. "We did it," he whispered back, an old sentence coming home. He stood there a long moment after I stepped into the cold, like he wanted to make sure the door still worked right. It did. The street was quiet. Snow squeaked under my boots. The sky had the thin look it gets when weather is thinking about changing. I walked without counting lampposts this time. I didn't need to. At the corner, I paused and looked back. Through the window, I saw him pick up the envelope, sit at the table, and hold it a moment before opening it. He didn't look for me. He didn't need to. Some things you do with your father in the room. Some things you do with his voice in your ear, even when the room is empty. Back at my small place, the cracked dish caught my keys like it always does. I sat in the chair with the nick and leaned my head back, the way I used to when my wife would come in from the garden and touch my shoulder to say dinner was ready. The building hummed its evening music, pipes talking, a door down the hall closing, a television 2 stories up, playing the end of a movie where 2 people finally say what they mean. I looked at my hands and found them steady, not shaking from holding on. Steady from letting go of the parts that weren't mine and holding firm to the parts that are. In my pocket, the peppermint clicked against nothing at all. I took it out, unwrapped it, and let the mint sit on my tongue. It tasted like small promises you keep without telling anyone, and the kind of winter that lets you breathe without biting your lungs. The next morning brought a small sound I hadn't heard in a while, the piano lid lifting slow, like someone was asking the room for permission. I was halfway up the walk before I knew why I'd come so early. The front door opened before I knocked. My son stood there in a plain shirt, bare feet, hair uncombed in a way that told me he'd slept and then not slept. He moved aside without words. The hinge didn't squeal, he'd oiled it. The guest calendar hung on the corkboard with 2 neat lines in pencil. Tune piano, Thursday, and fix fence, spring, and a square around New Year's with 1 word underlined twice, family. In the living room, the party lights were gone. The tree's lower bulbs glowed soft, like they were tired of showing off. The envelopes from the bank were stacked on the table with a coaster on top, as if to say, "We've put weight on this. We're learning." He reached into his pocket and touched the letter from his mother before he spoke. "I read it," he said, voice low. "She wrote about the door. She said, if the house forgets its rules, remind it that doors are for welcoming, not measuring worth." He swallowed. "She wrote my name 3 times. It looked steady." He held my eyes the way a grown man does when he is done rehearsing and ready to say the truth. I did wrong. The words were not dramatic. They were workmanlike. They held. In the quiet that followed, The girl stepped from the hallway, not dressed for a picture, no sharp coat, just a sweater that had seen years and a face without armor. She kept her hands clasped, fingers worrying a thread. "I read part of it too," she said. "He let me." She looked at the piano. She asked whoever loved him to protect this house, not own it. She sighed, the kind of breath you take when your frame is adjusting. I've been loud when I should have listened." It wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. It was an apology that knew its size. She reached into her pocket and slid a small brass key across the table toward me. "This was a copy I made," she said, not quite looking up. "I didn't ask." I picked it up, warm from her hand, heavy enough to count. I turned it twice and set it in the cracked dish we'd brought from my place and now kept by the door. "Thank you," I said. The ribbon on the wreath was straight today. It had learned its lesson. We were still in that soft moment when a knock landed on the front door that didn't belong to this house. 3 fast raps that said, "We're here to make things happen." My son's jaw tightened. He opened the door, and the girl's parents filled the frame with clipboards and smiles that had agendas tucked behind them. Behind them, 2 contractors stood in boots that had never tracked this hallway's light before. "We've got the demo team on call," the father announced, brandishing a folded estimate as if it were an invitation. "If we move fast, the bar can be installed before New Year's. Open flow, more value." He said value like a spell. The mother added, "And the piano. Let's get it listed while the market's hot." Her rings flashed. The tree lights caught them and turned them back into small stars, but they didn't warm the room. The contractors waited, polite, eyes scanning for the man who signs checks. My son stood tall. He did not look at me. He didn't have to. "Plans have changed," he said. "We're following the trust. Budget, calendar, no sale." The father's eyebrows lifted as if a waiter had delivered the wrong meal to his table. "Son," he said, a claim not earned, "this is momentum. We can't lose momentum." I stepped forward then. Not a leap. 2 quiet steps until I was in the middle of the room, the piano one shoulder, the table the other. "You don't have momentum." "Here," I said. "You have noise. There's a difference." The father smiled a shape that wanted to be a circle and settled for a hook. "Sir, with respect," he began, and I let him finish the sentence because respect has to be allowed to prove itself or fail. "We've invested time and goodwill. We expect to proceed." He held up the estimate. The contractor with a pencil behind his ear shifted his weight, sensing a wind change. I kept my voice even. "No work proceeds without written approval from the acting trustee," I said, nodding toward the calendar and the bank envelopes. "That's me. There is no approval. There will be no bar. There will be a tuned piano." The girl's mother emitted a laugh too thin to be sturdy. "You can't be serious. A home is for living." "Exactly," I said. "And this one has rules for how to live in it. They protect the people inside." I could feel my wife's letter in the room, though it lay folded in his pocket. It was like a lamp left on in a hallway, so no one trips on their way to bed. The contractors looked at one another. The older of the 2 cleared his throat, business instincts aligning with the scent of paper. "We'll need signatures from the trustee anyway," he said to his boots and then to me. "From you?" I nodded. "There won't be signatures." He gave a small, grateful shrug. No one likes tearing down a load-bearing wall just to find out the roof doesn't understand what holds it up. The father was slower to read the weather. "We've already placed deposits," he tried. "You'll be responsible for returning what shouldn't have been promised," I said. "We'll call the company together and explain there was no authority. They'll return it to the card they took it from." I let the next sentence sit in the air like a bench waiting for someone to choose it. "That card is suspended." The girl's parents had not expected that seat. Their mouths went still. The girl's eyes flicked to my son and then to the calendar, where the penciled lines were starting to mean something. The father's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced down. His face brightened and then fell in one movement. "Payment declined," the screen must have said, or something close to it. He tucked the phone away with a tight motion that admitted the room had changed shape. There was still the matter of pride, which always lingers after money has taken its bow. The mother tried one more door. "We only want what's best," she said, wrapping herself in the easy blanket of that sentence. I didn't pull it off. I handed it back folded. "Then you'll be happy to see him learn to keep a house," I said. "We've started with the hinge. Next, the piano. In spring, the fence." My son spoke then, and his voice did not need to climb on mine. "We'll host you for dinner next week," he said. "No party. No bar, just dinner. You bring dessert. We'll make the rolls." He glanced at me, and the word we landed right. The father searched my son's face for the old script and didn't find it. He tried one last time to take the stage. "This is disappointing," he said. My son didn't flinch. "It's different," he said. "Different is not always disappointing." The contractors found the door first, apologizing for boots that had not dirtied a floor. The parents followed because the room had no lines left that would hold them. The door closed with its quiet click. The hinge stayed silent. When they were gone, the house exhaled. Not loud. Just enough to shake something loose from the high corner where dust had settled. My son leaned back against the door and let his head bump the wood softly twice, like knocking to thank it for holding. Then he pushed off and went to the kitchen. He opened the drawer where the recipe cards live and took out the one with my wife's handwriting under the watermark of a grease stain, cinnamon rolls. He held it with both hands as if it might fold itself and fly away. "We'll make them?" he asked, already knowing. "Yes," I said. "We'll start the dough early. Let it rise near the radiator. You remember how she used to drape the towel over the bowl like a hat?" He smiled. Said it kept the dough from getting shy. We set the card on the counter like a small promise. The girl came closer, keeping her elbows in, watching like a person at the edge of a lake deciding if it's time to take off her shoes. "Can I help?" she said, and the question was different from the ones she'd asked before. It didn't test a boundary, it looked for one. "Measure the sugar," I said. She reached for the jar with careful fingers, and for the first time I could imagine her learning where we keep the spoons. Before we started, my son opened the piano lid again. He sat, not because anyone was watching, but because this is what you sit for when you're about to try. He pressed middle C, then D, then E, slow, tasting each note like he was relearning water. "She made me practice this run until my hands hated me," he said, a private smile tugging his mouth. "Then she'd kiss my knuckles and say, 'Now your hands owe you nothing.'" He looked at his fingers as if they were old teammates coming back from a long break. He played the simple tune she used to call us with. The house listened. The girl leaned in the doorway and closed her eyes. No one filmed it. There are moments you keep off screens so they don't shrink. By afternoon, the dough was under a towel near the radiator, a rounded hill rising slow and sure. The guest calendar had acquired 2 more pencil lines. Dinner with her folks, Thursday, bring rolls. And in a different hand, small and tidy, return contractor deposit, call at 3. My son glanced at the phone like it might bite, then picked it up and dialed. He put the call on speaker and let me hear him say, "Clearly, I authorized a deposit I had no right to authorize. The trustee did not approve. Please cancel and return to the originating card." The man on the line said a few words about policy and timelines. My son answered each one without heat. "Thank you," he finished, and when he hung up, he looked taller in a way that had nothing to do with bones. He wrote "confirmed" on the corkboard next to the note in a small square. The girl watched him and smiled, not the grin she wore when rooms were full, but a quiet one, like she'd found a seat that fit. The bank's routine letter sat on the piano where I'd left it, a white flag raised for anyone who thought rules were traps. I picked it up and read the first line out loud for the room. "Please confirm the primary occupant and the terms of use as outlined." My son reached for the pen I'd placed beside it without comment and signed under the sentence, his name steady as a beam. He underlined the word occupant once, not to show off, to remember. He slid the page back to me as if we were in church and passing something good down the pew. Twilight came like a comfortable jacket. We rolled out dough and spread butter and sugar and cinnamon, the air turning sweet in that old way that makes walls feel close on purpose. The girl laughed when flour dusted her nose. My son brushed it off with his thumb and then looked embarrassed at his own gentleness and then not embarrassed at all. We cut spirals and set them in the pan that has baked more birthdays than I can count. We covered it with the towel with the faint red stripes at the edge and waited. He used to bounce during this part. He used to ask how long and then ask again. Now he stood in the doorway and looked at the tree and the piano and the table and me. "I thought the house would feel smaller with all these rules," he said. "It feels bigger." "That's because it's deeper," I said. "Depth gives you room you can't see from the street." Just before we slid the pan into the oven, there was one more knock. Not loud, polite. My son checked with his eyes. I nodded. He opened the door. The contractor with the pencil stood there alone, hat in his hands. I wanted to say, he began, I've seen a lot of places torn up that didn't need tearing. You're doing right. He shifted, uncomfortable with his own softness. If you decide to fix that fence in spring, I'll give you a neighbor rate. He tipped his hat, embarrassed, and backed away. My son thanked him in a voice that knew how to thank. He closed the door and leaned his forehead against it for a second, like a man saying grace. They never expected that, he said, not as brag, as witness. Neither did I. Sometimes the world brings the right echo. We ate rolls at the table when the house was ready for them, frosting melting into the swirls, hands sticky, tea steaming. The girl's eyes watered when she bit into one, a small surprise breaking across her face. I don't know if it's the cinnamon or the story, she said, wiping her cheek with the back of her wrist. Both, I said. They're the same ingredient. We sat in that sugar and warmth and the long hum of something repaired. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his mother's letter. He read a line out loud, voice steady, eyes glancing at the piano on the word door, like the house was listening. Remember, he read, that a house is a promise with a roof. He folded it carefully and put it back. He didn't ask to keep it. He knew it lived here now, whether it lived on paper or in us. Later, when the plates were stacked and the lights were turned down to their winter level, I stood by the window and watched the street take a breath. The world looked ordinary. The good kind of ordinary. The kind that wraps around you like a coat you paid off in the spring and still fits when the weather turns. My son came to stand next to me. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. He put his hand on the frame where my hand had rested 1,000 times before and said, almost to the wood, "Thank you for the letters." "Thank your mother," I said. We stood there with the wreath's ribbon a neat line, with the hinge quiet, with the piano ready to be tuned because we'd decided to keep its voice. If you're still with me, tell me where you're watching from, what city, what kitchen, what car by a curb, and if you've ever had to hold your tongue until the right room appeared for your words. Tell me if you've learned the difference between noise and music, between a party and a dinner, between a lock and a key. Share this with someone who thinks quiet is weak. Like it if you felt the door open in a better way. Comment if you've been told you're not welcome and found the sentence that let you walk back in with your head up. Subscribe if you want more stories where the